Bonjour. Pour les francophones, il y a une traduction simultanée et vous pouvez l'écouter avec des casques. Donc si vous en avez besoin, vous pouvez vous manifester, on va vous apporter un casque. Parce que la conversation sera en anglais.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience as we get started. We are all delighted and also surprised that this was oversubscribed, so really great to see everyone coming out on a Saturday afternoon. My name is Brendan Embser. I'm a senior editor at Aperture, and it's a pleasure and an honor, obviously, to be sharing a stage with two people who I respect, collaborate with, admire greatly for many years. First of all, Dr. Deborah Willis. Thank you for that. Dr. Deborah Willis is university professor and chair of the Department of Photography and Imaging at the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. A MacArthur Fellow and a member of the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences, she has pursued a dual professional career as a photographer and one of the most renowned historians of photography, specifically African-American photography. Her many books include The Black Civil War Soldier, Posing Beauty, Let Your Motto Be Resistance, and Envisioning Emancipation. And since 2006, Dr. Deb Willis has co-organized thematic conferences around the idea of Black portraitures, focusing on imaging the Black body, many of which have taken place here in Paris. So I know that Deb has a very long, authentic, and beautiful relationship with this city. And to my far right and on your left is the artist Tyler Mitchell. Tyler is an artist, photographer, and filmmaker from Atlanta, Georgia. He makes photographs and videos that offer utopian visions of empowerment, self-determination, tenderness, and camaraderie. His work has been published in Aperture, ID, Dazed, and Vogue, among many others, and collected by numerous museums, including the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., and most recently, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which earlier this spring acquired 5 works. Tyler has presented solo exhibitions at Foam in Amsterdam, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the International Center of Photography in New York. In 2019, he made the cover of Antoine Sargent's book, The New Black Vanguard, Photography Between Art and Fashion, which was published by Aperture, and then toured as an exhibition around the world. Just one second here. Tyler's solo exhibition, Wish This Was Real, opened in June at CO Berlin and is currently on view at the Finnish Museum of Photography. In 2025, the show will travel to Photo Élysée in Lausanne, Switzerland, followed by a presentation here in Paris at the MEP, and which is opening in October 2025, and will conclude at the Photo Arsenal in Vienna in 2026. So for those of you who've walked through the fair, you may have encountered many, many people getting their selfies in front of this gorgeous Tyler Mitchell picture, which is the headliner for a presentation here at Perry Photo. Tyler has organized a dialogue between his own work and the work of Richard Avedon in a presentation called Avedon and Me. And we thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to unpack some of the shared themes between Tyler's work and the work of Avedon, and to really find out what are the connections across multiple generations and the connections between fashion, portraiture, and self-determination.
But Brendan, before you start,
yes,
say something about who you are to the audience.
Oh, well, among other things, I'm a former student of Dr. Deborah Willis at New York University. And I'm the editor of several books at Aperture, most recently Ariel Bob Willis, who was just talking here at the fair moments ago in the Eyes section. So let me just, we'll get to that. We'll get to that, Deb. Yeah. And actually you preempted it because I was just about to say how we all know each other. So the title for this panel is borrowed from a book called Cutting a Figure, Fashioning Black Portraiture, which was assigned to our class at NYU called The Black Body and the Lens. And Cutting a Figure, which maybe Deb can tell us a little bit more about, is a way of reading the black figure in imagery, but also a way of reading how black photographers are posing subjects when they are behind the lens. And one of the subjects of that class, and one of the case studies of Rick Powell's book, was the model Danielle Luna, who I hadn't heard about before I took your class, and she was a muse to Andy Warhol and in some ways to Avedon. And yeah, so I had the privilege of studying Africana Studies at NYU with Deb. Tyler was also a student of Deb's, not at the same time as me, but in a similar capacity. And I think it should be obvious that we would not be here today without Deb's profound influence. She inspires us and also makes us work, and I love that. I love that. So very quickly, I just wanted to mention that I've had a great pleasure of working with Tyler on several projects at Aperture going back to 2018, and I wanted to give you a quick overview of some of Tyler's recent projects to contextualize why this Avedon conversation is of a piece with a lot of thinking that's been going on in Tyler's work, research, and exhibition making since 2022. So what we're looking at now is a view of Chrysalis, which was Tyler's 2022 exhibition solo exhibition debut in London with Gagosian Gallery. And at the same time, Tyler presented a project at Frieze Masters, which included what he has called a camera roll vitrine. And this was a way of opening up our understanding of Tyler's work and seeing references and ideas and images, and some of them photographic, some of them from other arts. And after working with Tyler on an essay for Gagosian magazine, I was invited to work on him with an exhibition, which is called Wish This Was Real, and you'll see a few views here. This exhibition at Domestic Imaginaries was on view at the SCAD Museum of Art in Savannah in 2023, and included a new way of Tyler's expressing his artistic practice, which is, in this case, furniture, and bringing photo books and cards and other images to bear on a kind of widening conversation. And this gave us the idea in Wish This Was Real to present a kind of exhibition within the exhibition, which we called Alters Acres, and you'll see that in just a moment. These are some views of Tyler's show in Berlin. And in that show, there was an exhibition within the exhibition which was about dialogues across time and also conversations with other artists. So Rashid Johnson, Gordon Parks, Carrie Mae Weems, Seydou Keita, Grace Wells Bonner. And this was a way of showing how wide and curious Tyler's imagination is, and how many deep conversations he's had with artists who are living and artists who have gone before us and who have impacted his work or his way of thinking. So that brings us to Perry Photo and to this presentation, and which, as I said, is of a piece, I think, with Tyler's opening up his visual strategies to the audience. So I wanted to start with you, Tyler. I know that Avedon may not be an enormous influence or reference for you, but nevertheless, he's an iconic photographer, and I'm curious to know what your relationship is with him, to your work, to your way of thinking, and what inspired you to select the works that you did for this presentation.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you, Brendan, for the great introduction. Now we're both students of Deb's getting to talk. And it's just wonderful to be here with you. Thank you, Deb, for your generosity. How do I respond? I mean, Avedon is such a figure that we all know, right, deeply in a way that we kind of almost take for granted in this way, because there were so many iconic images that came out of his body of work. And, you know, actually in school, another professor of mine, because I actually moved from Atlanta to New York, not to study photography, but to study film and television. So I was much more, initially much more obsessed by movies than I was necessarily by photographs. But when I started to veer into photography, it was Deb who was really bringing me. So you've noticed me on the photography floor, sneaking in, using the facilities and the equipment. And another professor at the time, Yolanda Cuomo, who worked for Avedon, I think for the last 20 years of his life, taught a class in school called magazine making class. And so actually she was another sort of professor who told lots of stories of working with Avedon and Avedon's life. So it's weird now to be doing this presentation here and be thinking about how subconsciously he's been always there, always around, and how, again, a lot of the iconic images from his body of work I really took for granted until I really sat down and thought about what my relationship to him was. And I think that, did you want to say?
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, please keep going.
Anyway, I just think that, I think that one part of this presentation, or one goal of this presentation, was to really frame up not only the Avedon we know, but also maybe the Avedon we don't know as much. So the idea was to bring together, some of the iconic portraits from the 1960s, but also some of the work he was making with James Baldwin. And so a year ago, when I was asked to, choose one photograph for the Avedon 100 exhibition, which was in New York, I chose the photo of him and Baldwin when they were 22 years old. And I knew from Yolanda, I knew from, even in your class when we would touch on Avedon, that him and Baldwin were friends in high school, that they went to high school together. They grew apart as adults and then came back together to make this book, Nothing Personal. So that's what became the centering curatorial concept of this presentation, was how he was navigating in the 60s his own work as a fashion photographer and his own deepening social engagement as an artist. Yeah.
And you've set up a number of fascinating dialogues in the presentation at the Gagosian booth. There are ideas of weddings and love and coming together. There are beach scenes and water as both a metaphor and as a social space. And then there's the question of social justice, which is addressed, of course, in Nothing Personal, and we'll get to that. I would, for anyone who is interested, and I assume this is a captive audience, there's a wonderful 10-page print spread about this presentation by Tyler and Avedon and me in Le Monde magazine, and they did something that you did not do, which was to pair the work directly one to the next, which makes for a set of fascinating comparisons. But I think your presentation physically here at Pair Photo is opening up one scene at a time and allowing viewers to move through and sort of find all of the connections. I would like to turn to you, Deb, and I imagine that in some ways Avedon might have been kind of a bit of cultural wallpaper for you. I know you read a lot of magazines and grew up in a space where pictures were everywhere, and Avedon was such a titanic force in fashion, in culture. He was someone who was with celebrities, both photographing them and hanging around with them in New York City. Who was Avedon to you as you were becoming interested in photography, and how has your relationship to his pictures changed over the course of your years of study, seeing exhibitions, including his work, and seeing his work treated as art as opposed to magazine editorial?
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. It means a lot to share my work, my thoughts with two wonderful students that I had in the classroom, that basically both of them transformed my life over time. But I love the fact that you have the quote here in terms of gesture, the form, but the idea of being alive joyfully and about pleasure and about beauty. And this is what I experienced with Avedon, his work, when I realized that and discovered early on that he and James Baldwin were close in high school, and the photograph that transformed me in terms of the ideas of their faces. How do we create a portrait of a friendship that's cut and shaped together? And they basically formed a wonderful impression on my mind. But that's when I was younger in photography in the 70s. I was also looking at ways that he looked at beauty and imagined beauty through the everyday beauty of life within Hollywood, but also with fashion, but also in comparing him with Gordon Parks. So they were all central to me of looking at the idea of portraits and how do we assert portraits and storytelling about an individual. But then at the same time, I was fascinated that he was making these grand gestures with portraits, but also thinking about his inspiration for photographers such as Doug Harris, Danny Lyons, and others during the Civil Rights Movement. So his activism basically shaped my interest in his work, not only the fashion photography, but his idea of activism in Black culture. The fact that he took time out of his life to make sure that the young Black photographers who were entering, who were SNCC members, who wanted to document and make images about the experience of the voting rights, about rights, period, in the South, that he was there and indicating a way and finding ways to teach, the young students, specifically during Freedom Summer. So all of this was part of my life with Avedon, and so it was really a pleasure to see the new book that was presented and other works that were presented based on the experience of my life with him.
Well, thank you for that. And I thought maybe since you taught us so well about close reading of images, we could look at a few of the images that Tyler selected. And some of them are in this presentation are iconic, obviously, and some are maybe even exhibited for the first time or very rarely exhibited, and that's so special. And so you've brought to bear a kind of wide range of Avedon experience, both the familiar and the unfamiliar. And two images are from a debutante cotillion in Louisiana in 1963. And both of them, I think, if it was a test of Photo 101 in the first year of photo school, some students may not realize that these are Avedon images. And maybe I'll start with you, Tyler. What was your thinking about the selection for this show, and specifically these two images? And as we move through, a little bit about your choices and what attracted you, or what were you hoping to kind of set up for the viewer?
Yeah. Well, from my understanding, unless somebody in this room knows, otherwise I don't think these have been seen on view. But these are pictures that basically the foundation generously kind of just opened up a box of when I went to the foundation. I mean, when I first did the Avedon 100 selection, I was asking them, are there things that have been lesser seen? Avedon with Baldwin. That was what I started with. And then I went into the foundation's building on 57th Street in New York, and I was just like, look, what other things do you have? What was Avedon doing that we might not have seen, or what was happening around this period? We would look at different decades. What was happening around, the 60s? And they just opened up a box of these amazing, there's what I remember, there's about 25 of these amazing moments of debutante cotillions in Louisiana. And the way it was explained to me was that, Avedon, one of the things that is in the background layers of a lot of these selections is that the access Avedon had allowed him to kind of take these leaps and these jumps, right? So Daniele Luna, like putting her on the cover of Harper's Bazaar in 1965, which was 65, was like, you have to put yourself in that time. That was an effort he had to make to convince the editors of the magazine to do that at the moment when she was the first black kind of model on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. And so I am checking my facts.
No, but that's all with, Rick Powell,
Rick Powell.
His research, and that was really significant.
And I mean, so what I'm saying is he had access, and there was an accent coach who was teaching all the movie stars of the moment how to have a Southern accent for different roles for movies, and she had all this access to these black cotillion ceremonies in Louisiana. She said, Dick, you have to come down here and see these. And his clear fascination with fashion, with dress, and as you said, with pleasure and with joy in these photographs, I think is very apparent. And while they are unusual Avedons, they are very striking in a different way, where they are like these documents of true black ceremony that I find very fascinating, that you really I haven't seen much of. I've looked at a lot of photographs. I haven't seen a lot of 1960s Louisiana debutante cotillion photographs. And so the fact that he was doing that sometimes within the same span of months or weeks of photographing some of the icons of that time, whether it was Hepburn or Liz Taylor, Daniele Luna, this says a lot about him.
And to me,
Can I follow up with that? Both. Can you go back to the first one? If it's possible. Yep. Just the idea of 1963, what was happening in America was traumatic, and what he found, and the person who invited him to this experience, is to find the joy in black life. But cotillion life was photographed often by black photographers, documenting the joy of the Sweet 16 and what happens when coming out in terms of club culture in the States, in the South, but also in the North. So having the opportunity to walk your daughter through the cotillion ball, and then the next one, and then to the concept of beauty that he is photographing, the cotillion crown, the pearls, but also the way that the leaves, it feels like that she's like an angel coming out of this. And what I find in this photograph, and I noticed it early on as well, is that he wanted to have that delicacy and remind us of the humanity of black people during this 1963 movement time period, that there is activism going on within the community of political activism, but there's also activism within the everyday life of Black people during this time. And then using, this highly grained image, soft focus, but also using the reflection of light, just kind of giving us a chance to read this image in the delicacy of her face and the beauty. It's just a wonderful moment for us to pause and to remember that this is a young woman that is, coming out and about to transform her life as a debutante.
And it's just worth underscoring the year, as you did, Deb, 1963. Ta-Nehisi Coates says that America didn't become a democracy until 1965 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So the idea of joy as a form of resistance, I think, can be read into many of these images, or at least that's what I feel like the Deb Willis way of unpacking you would want us to think beyond the surfaces and the beauty and to understand, okay, what was actually, as you said, happening in the early 1960s, especially in the American South. And when we talk about joy and spontaneity, also these images of weddings, which were included in Nothing Personal, and are a little bit strange to me in their gestures and in their dislocation, the sense that this is a really special moment, but we have absolutely no geographical, physical context. It's the Avedon atomic white, but it's not a typical Avedon either, because it's so in the moment, it's such a freeze frame. What did you like about this image, Tyler?
Yeah, that precisely that, like the idea that there's something that was typical of Avedon and atypical. I think it was really challenging understanding, not only grappling with certain formal interests that I shared with his work, but also some differences, right? So in this, like you had said, there were many, great examples by Black photographers, much earlier, with James Van Der Zee, and, even your great book about Black Civil War. There were documents of these sorts of preservations of humanity and joy. But I think Avedon was a canonical figure I had to almost wrestle with, and also think about the fact that he was making this kind of a picture along with the other pictures he was making. This picture, like you said, is almost like a strange freeze frame of a real moment, which we don't see much from his, and these are all in Nothing Personal, that they were in a series of all these City Hall weddings. I've actually been to that same City Hall, photographed some friends' weddings, and never have released those pictures, but the idea that he was fascinated with the ritual of love, or a deeply American ritual like going to City Hall and getting married in this way, and just the communion, the figures all coming together, and the clear elation on the central figure's face, carrying what we think is the marriage certificate. I don't know. It spoke to me almost immediately as like you said, a typical and non-typical Avedon picture in a way.
And in Nothing Personal, there are multiple families of different races, so it wasn't just a focus on Black families for this particular group of pictures. But I think that the white background then unified it. So what we're focusing on is, as you say, the joy, the elation, and the kind of coming together in a family moment. This obviously is an iconic photograph of Marian Anderson, and one that many people in this audience, I'm sure, know very well. Deb, I'm curious what your relationship is to this picture, and I wanted to mention one wonderful quote from the late Bell Hooks, who said that the history of Black liberation movements in the United States could be characterized as a struggle over images as much as it has been a struggle for rights, for equal access. The question of access is one that is related to the story of Marian Anderson. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It's just wonderful when having to see this in the gallery. But also, I grew up in Philadelphia, so those of us who are from Philadelphia have a strong history and a relationship with a Philadelphia native who left the city and stayed in the city. But the fact is that as an opera singer, during 1955, we know of the trauma and the drama of opera, but also the opportunities that she had to travel the world, to carry, of course, the whole aspect of the Black race into opera. And so we think about what happened with Emmett Till in 55 and other experiences that happened in 55. But here we see her in full voice. He captures that sound. He captures her inner spirit, the way that the lighting falls within her face, but then her hair, just the flow. And I think that that's the exciting aspect for me, to look at this photograph in this exhibition next to your work. That energy that Avedon was able to capture in this. We hear the sound. There's sound in this photograph. So this sense of emotion that he captures in a still photograph of a portrait, but also within this moment of the circular sound of what is going on in this opera, but there's also some drama in the way that he's photographed. And I think that that's the energy that I found in the exhibition, that you are walking through, as I walked through the exhibition, I felt silence, I felt sound, and I felt that energy that happened during, we're going through a very difficult time in our lives now, uncertainty. This is an experience where a Black woman in Philadelphia who travels the world to sing opera, to tell these stories within these operas that were written years ago, but she's carrying the aspect of being an African-American star.
Absolutely. And Tyler, you have set up a wonderful and provocative juxtaposition with one of Avedon's pictures, which is about the Daughters of the American Revolution. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that her eyes are closed in this picture, that there's sort of this moment that I really like about her. While there's sound and there's singing, there's almost her singing for herself than performing for the camera, which I think is a long line of other kind of thinking about sort of sovereignty of quiet, Kevin Quashie's book, which is talking about Black interiority and having a rich inner life. So, but yeah, in relation to the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is in the show, that picture is obviously, 1939. She is up to perform for an integrated audience at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., and it becomes a huge controversy because the Daughters of the American Revolution keep her out of doing that performance, and it sort of does many things, spirals, catapults her into sort of notoriety and controversy, but also those two groups, are in diametric opposition, and Avedon photographed both of them for the purpose of nothing personal, to my understanding. And so I think even in his work, he was aware of these relationships, right?
And just to follow, there is a recent PBS documentary on her that just really captures that 39 period and the early life that she experienced. And I think that would be a great opportunity for all of you to have a chance to look at the documentary on her life.
Extra credit for those who do. Danielle Luna is not in this exhibition presentation, but I would be remiss not to bring her up because I really learned about Avedon in a critical way through Deb's class and through Rick Powell's book, Cutting a Figure. And this is a spread from the What's Happening issue of Harper's Bazaar in the mid-'60s, which was, I think, a pivotal moment for fashion photography, for fashion, for youth culture, and for a different type of female silhouette. The already more than 10 years or more after the Avedon woman becomes known as a kind of term of art in fashion. And I thought maybe just for one moment we should dwell on Danielle Luna and how revolutionary she was and how slightly forgotten she is because of her degrees of refusal and because she sadly died young and didn't have the kind of career that we see from Naomi or some of the other Black supermodels who have came in her wake. But either of you, the question is, tell us your feelings about Danielle Luna and specifically what you see in her as a muse to Avedon in these two fabulous pictures.
Yeah, I think that Gordon Parks also photographed her, and others photographed Danielle Luna, a woman from Detroit who basically changes her life and her idea of self. But also the concept of cutting a figure. It's like we grew up hearing terms like, you're sharp, you're cutting this. And so the idea of how do you cut a figure in a portrait, by stance, style. And then he's able to, photographing her, he is relating the experience that she's having, that she enters into this new world of modeling. And she's basically stepping out of the Detroit experience to New York into international fame, but also the way that she wore her glasses, her hair. She's introducing a totally different new style for Black models.
And one thing that I learned in your class that I love, and it's not an image in this presentation, but I know it's one that Tyler and I are both obsessed with, which is the Avedon photograph of Daniel Luna in a Paco Rabanne dress with the metal pleats and also the ribbons that go up from the shoes. And you said to us in the class, it's the 1960s, it's the space race, she looks like a rocket. And I thought that was the most amazing way of reading a photograph in the context of like the Cold War and many other things that were happening. But the dress on the left is Bill Blass, and I think that one thing that Avedon did was to set fashion in motion and just set clothes through into gesture. And I wondered if, Tyler, you had any feelings about Daniel Luna or the way that Avedon approached kind of a fashion portrait in the one that we're looking at.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, the shape. I think 1965 was like Avedon's revolutionary year, right? Because also he was doing this, but then was it a few months after that he did the kind of what I would say the groundbreaking layout that Vinciletti showed me of like. It would be, portrait of a model of the moment, beauty model, next to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, next to... I'm much more interested in how he was able to place these broad, vast gestures together in these layouts, and I think also him pushing for her visibility and her also having her own agency in that sort of push for visibility was really a powerful... Like, that's kind of my thoughts on her. Like, she is that, and then, of course, the tragedy of her passing early leaves so many questions open to be answered, but
and the Paco Rabanne image was not published, and in fact,
No.
Avedon was not allowed to photograph her after that. She was, it should be emphasized that she was of the first major kind of Black supermodel, but she was held back and not photographed, or not appearing nearly as much as she might have.
Yeah.
I want to skip ahead to make sure we have time to talk about Tyler's work, and going into that to talk a little bit about some incredibly beautiful images that Tyler pulled from a series that Avedon made with a 35 millimeter camera on the Santa Monica beach, and to include here a quote from James Baldwin, whose words are threaded throughout Nothing Personal, about the sea and about the ebb and flow of culture and generations, which we'll talk about a little bit. But when you see the show downstairs, or if you have already, there are 3 exquisite prints that, again, don't look characteristically like Avedon's. In fact, they look like some kind of sketch pad for Moonlight or something that is on Barry Jenkins' mood board. But Tyler, how did you find these images, and what was your thinking about including them, and how did they make you feel?
Yeah, similarly, Nothing Personal and going through the Foundation's archive. But when I saw them, I immediately felt connected to them just for their unusual approach to subject matter, to form, when we see these images, we're seeing, of course, he's depicting, an newly integrated beach in Santa Monica, racially integrated. So you're seeing figures of different races coming together in the same body of water, and just the poetic power of water as well. Like this sort of, as you said, these almost early visions connected to a film like Moonlight. But what swimming and the prevention from swimming in certain bodies of water meant and means for Black Americans in this period of time is what I'm thinking about. And also this idea that they are strangely joyful, but also quite devastating pictures somehow. I don't know why, but this young boy kind of clinging on for what feels like dear life. And they just moved me. I knew of the one that I think you're going to flick to next, which this is one I had seen in, I think, the Avedon 100 show, which is kind of the iconic one of father hoisting up his baby to the very tippy top of the frame. And just the way Avedon embraced things, I think he very much abandoned or not abandoned, did not want in his studio environment, which was blur, which was grain, which was softness, and which was environment. I thought his confidence in photographing these scenes and kind of embracing the things that he otherwise leaves out of his other work was really fascinating to me.
And
But just to
yeah,
follow up on that,
sure.
just to think about Santa Monica during this time, we know Bruce Davison photographed in Santa Monica and many other photographers, but Muscle Beach was the place that a lot of body figures, young people were going to feel that sense of freedom. And Santa Monica offered that to people in California who visited the beach, but also this image I love because of that sense of freedom, the joy of having your child, but also the strength of knowing that anchor is there. And that's what I love about the light in there. And also I totally agree with you with the experience of the grain, what happens with that grain and looking at this time of day, which is not, early morning or afternoon.
Yeah.
So.
And I felt that like him going to Santa Monica and making these pictures was some acknowledgement of like the America that was inevitably coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like knowing, like traveling between Louisiana and, and also traveling he did with Baldwin in the 60s too. They were very tough pictures to racially segregated mental institutions. Him going from there to these scenes, which are very, very different pictures, but both with a 35 millimeter camera. And these scenes basically were, an eventuality, right? That America was going to reach this newly liberated, racially integrated, right? Or so we thought, place, right? That this was an eventuality for the South, right? Don't know if you had a thought about that.
Yeah, just to think about it, there are a lot of Black people, in terms of migration movements, from East Texas, Louisiana, moving to California.
LA, yeah, and all the Black people in LA are from Mississippi.
And one other detail I would add, which is the beautiful opportunity you've presented us with this exhibition, is that in contrast to the wedding image that we just looked at, the City Hall, which is ultra sharp and very Avedon in a way, this grain also indicates that he's quite far from his subjects. I mean, we associate Avedon with almost
Closeness.
Unforgiving detail, William Casby or Nixon's secretary or any of these other characters that you go in almost to perfect detail. Here you do feel a sense of distance and observation and a type of photography that was maybe different from him. And with that, I also just wanted to mention the time period here in 1959, Avedon published Observations, which was a book with a text by Truman Capote, and which was not necessarily well received. And in 1964, he published, and he labored, and he begged James Baldwin to please finish his text for Nothing Personal, and that also wasn't well received. And I think part of that is, we're at this fair, and I feel like it should be emphasized that it's an enormously exciting and also a privilege to be in the space where photography is taken so seriously, both in the market and by curators and all of this. But this was probably unimaginable in the 1960s, and there was no market for photography. And so the snobbery and the suspicion around an unbelievably successful and wealthy photographer like Avedon, who is doing Revlon ads, who is doing Vogue projects all the time, to be working on a book that is in his own narration about social justice, you can understand why people were resistant even, and the other thing that should be mentioned is in 1959, Robert Frank's The Americans was published, and there was a sense of that book kind of went out quietly into the night and people didn't know what to make of it, but it then became extremely famous and important. So Avedon was navigating a very difficult and strange territory that feels very foreign to us now. I want to move on to Tyler's own work, and Deb, if you want to add anything about Nothing Personal, by all means, please do. Otherwise, we can
make it personal.
Make it personal. Right. Okay. From one beautiful, evocative water scene to another one decades later, passing through by Tyler Mitchell. Water figures into your work a lot lately.
Yes.
What's that about?
I mean, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, started working on a series of work called Chrysalis. I ended up calling it Chrysalis, which was about these ideas of emergence, kind of growing up, transformation, and relationships to nature. I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking increasingly about my upbringing in Atlanta, Georgia, which is kind of known as the city of trees in America, and has lots of nature parks. I grew up in a neighborhood called Lake Sentinel. Would sometimes go fishing on that lake with my dad. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, but we would take like what my neighbor's little boat. So suddenly all these memories, deep memories, started coming kind of back as I was making my own work. And the relationship to nature, the sort of, as you would say, the sort of pleasurable joy it afforded me, but also the meditative qualities nature afforded me, and then also the realization of the history of what happened in some of those areas. And I'm talking about in Atlanta, Georgia, lots of sort of trauma around the landscape in Georgia, and so kind of trying to bring those two things together, because those two things have always been there when we're talking about Black life and photography, when we're talking about joy and devastation in equal measure, right? And so understanding those things as being part of not only history, but wanting to impart them in my work, I've been making these pictures where figures are kind of complicatedly wading through water, somewhere caught suspended between submerging and emerging, somewhere caught between, another one's called flotation, this one's called passing through, all these different states of moving between and into nature and into these muddy black or brown waters. And I don't know, they're more psychological than they are literal, because they're not sort of trying to engage with documentary photography even, or be a document of anything, but more be a figment of a sort of mental space and be, yeah.
I agree in terms of the psychological, because when I viewed this in the exhibition and the slides that you sent, I thought about, social clubs in the North that Black people had, because some of the swimming pools were segregated. And so a lot of Black kids didn't learn how to swim because of segregation. And the experience that I had with swimming, and I can see the sense of freedom, that there's a comfort level there, there's a safety that I see with the way that his head is bobbing. The fear that I have of water, because I had a traumatic experience, but then my cousins who had the life of, freedom to swim, but the fact that here's this water that's flowing and this kid that's moving through, this head is bobbing through. And I just think about the aspect of peace, within this framing. And it's something to know, if you can swim on your back, you're comfortable. You're at ease with self, that you're floating. And this is what I felt in this image, that there is a sense of freedom and comfort in this, in the belief that they're going to stay above the water, because I never could stay. So I know that's the psychological experience when I see this work.
Yeah, my mother as well, who, told me a story of, she got caught in a riptide once, almost lost her life going against the current. When you get caught in a riptide, you're supposed to go with or sort of float and just go. And she started swimming, I believe, against the current, or basically she did what you're not supposed to do in a riptide, and almost lost her life. And she told me that story, and she's the my dad's more like a fish. He can swim. Very confident in water, and I always noticed my mother's hesitation, and I was always just so curious. It never really sank in deeply, when you're a kid and you're like, well, why wouldn't my, superhero mother be able to swim or do it? And you realize these things really set in deeply from, early childhood memories and historical access to these spaces and to other, things in people's lives. So anyway, the water has become like a character in a way in some of my pictures. And
a fashion image that's also an image about communion in some ways, and that is also the word that you use in the title, the subtitle. Can you talk a little bit about style? How does self-styling, the way you work with stylists, either for fashion commissions or the way you work with clothes for your artistic projects, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this picture, it was made in an editorial context first, so it was in collaboration with a stylist, and it was a really wonderful, and one of my collaborators is in the room here today, Julia Wagner, who's also who collaborates with me on a lot of set design and the world of a lot of these pictures, and sometimes it's always like doing less set design, sometimes more, but we're always just trying to come to an equilibrium. We're trying to come to a vision. It starts with thinking about what we want to say in a fashion story, how we want to leverage the commissioning of a fashion story to become something, hopefully greater. Again, images play many roles in our culture, and so I think that in this collaboration, in this instance, there was something I wanted to make about communion, of course. There was something I wanted to make about the unity, but also individuality of these great ascendant, Sudanese and African supermodels of the moment. They're all a group of actual friends in real life, but they're also all like this force in the fashion industry and in visual culture, I would argue, at large. And so they're like the new faces of the now, like these girls. And so they actually all hang out. They all joke around with each other. But no one had taken a moment to visualize them all together. So there's this whole story, and this is one image from the story of them together in this landscape. And while they are sort of unified by their backgrounds, they're all sort of picked out individually here based on these gowns. And we wanted, again, the landscape and nature playing a character in my own background, being from Atlanta, but also wanting it to play a character in the work and creating what I hoped was a fresh or a new vision of these wonderful young women in this landscape was the impetus for the series. And then, go from there.
It's fascinating because we rarely see models together, but the sense of their talking about or creating a style or a pose, but to see them in this kind of joyful moment of, the touch, the feel, the fabric is just kind of linking all of this together.
And being between, like, there's not a moment of direct confrontation with the camera. Like, they're all having a moment to each other in a way.
It's like you're kind of stepping back.
And just because they were just hanging out, really. Because it was just actually, setting up a scenario and then being like, now I want to see what happens. Because, all the gestures and all the things that were happening there were just very real in the moment and weren't. And I also take up that concept that I was talking about with Marion of quiet, of like interiority, that hopefully this picture draws out a sense of a rich inner life as much as it does like the beauty of who they are, if that makes sense.
It's similar in some ways to the Avedon, the City Hall wedding, the sense of a spontaneous feeling, a communal feeling, A wedding picture. I'll start with you, Deb, as the person who wrote the book about James Van Der Zee. When you are looking at Tyler's work, what are the lineages that you see, and particularly when looking at an image like this one, a beautiful New York landscape and an impeccably dressed Black couple at a moment of officiating their love? I mean, what are the lineages that you would advise us to read?
The first thing I read was 2020 when I happened to see this photograph and how isolated we all were in 2020. This outside scene of a precious moment being captured, but also the spots that are on there. I don't know if it's rain or if it's something that's there that's keeping this ceremony timeless. And I feel that this is a timeless experience where love comes together on a brownstone experience. I don't know if it's Brooklyn or if it's uptown in Harlem or something like that. But the brown of her dress, the brown of the steps, and then these two white figures in terms of their fashion. So
and a woman
very quiet.
Photographer.
And a woman photographer, yes. But it's quiet. And so when I think about ceremony with this aspect of this photograph, I felt 2020, and I felt this sense of solitude.
6 feet away. Yeah.
I felt solitude. I felt the aspect of what's happening with this family, and just to say that this photograph needed to be documented, and also documented with the woman photographer, because we rarely, see the photographer documented in a family wedding shot. So I think that was important.
Tyler has, over the last few years, been making wonderful experiments with mirror and with unique object photographs and moving into a sculptural space in his art making. And two such beautiful examples are here at the fair, including prints, and another one we'll see shortly in our show that we worked on together in Berlin that's now traveling. There are a couple of mirror works too. What is it about the mirror that became a kind of artistic material for you over the last few years, Tyler?
Yeah, it's funny how it comes, but it was a lot of experimentations with a printer friend, wanting to make something that was more materially inclined and wanting to make something that, yeah, there could be a sense of play with the photographs. It started because a friend of mine has been really into UV printing lately, and just to be technical for a brief moment, UV printing is essentially when there's color, there's ink, and when there's white, there's no ink. And so when I realized that, I got very excited, because then I thought, well, you can basically select parts of a picture if it makes sense for that image, doesn't make sense for every image, to then become clear. There's no ink, and then there's a way to make a mirror, because mirror is just glass. So I essentially started playing with the idea of asking just questions like, well, can we print on glass, and can you mirror that glass? And mirroring glass is all about, silver and chemical. It's about chemistry, really, onto the back of glass. And so that's how it started 2 years ago when I had my show, again, Chrysalis in London. One of the works became this moment where a young boy was lying horizontally in a body of water, but half of the body of water was reflection, and the other half was, also reflection from the water, but it was trees, so that was green, and over here was white because of the sky. And the white basically dappled into this like beautiful mirror, because we were able to choose what parts of the photograph became white. And so anyway, long technical explanation of saying, it fascinated me first, and then it became this real conceptual possibility second, where the viewer was implied in the process of looking and being looked back at. And I love that this picture like almost bisects this model's face. The model is actually Alton Mason, the now like meteoric superstar male model of always. But it's actually created from a light leak from the opening of my camera, my film camera, and then closing it back. And so the light leak bisects his face in half. And what I was able to do was select parts of his features to allow the viewer to see themselves within. And it creates this interesting experience with the photograph.
And maybe I'll just skip to the second one that's on, the second mirror piece that's on view in Gagosian, called Sprayed Down, which also takes the blur to a new space and almost breaks the fourth wall, as it were, with the character wanting almost to reach out and spray the viewer. I wondered, Deb, what you made of this picture, and I will say that there are, as Tyler knows, I'm obsessed with the white picket fence of Paul Strand and the way that the white picket fence appears in several of Tyler's works, but that kind of American iconography that is a bit character here, but an important one in the composition. What are your thoughts on this one,
And it's
Deb?
opposite,
Yeah.
because he's from Georgia, I'm from Pennsylvania, and I see the hose. I see the hose. Summer, hot, kids playing, in the street. And I think of, Gordon's work and other photographers in Philadelphia that are feeling that water. And I didn't see the picket fence, right away, so it's fascinating that with the mirror, you feel as if the spray of the water, you feel as if the water is part of that moment, because if you ever hold that strong hose to your face, you're blurred, and everything about it is, but you're feeling the warmth of the water or the cold of the water. You're feeling that water just splash through the face and the body, which also becomes an experience that every child enjoys, and you see it throughout photography in the 70s and the 60s, and it just kind of also, with these images, there's this sense of freedom that you're offering the viewer, that what happens within that exchange of any object that you decide to focus on, that it has a relationship or relational experience for the viewer to feel as if they're part of experiencing this moment.
And I just now made this connection that in the show that Tyler curated within the show in Berlin, there was a beautiful picture by Mark Cohen called Hose Spray, which is a dreamy summer scene of a hose spraying water over a beautiful garden, a non-figurative scene, but one that brings you right into the space of a kind of summer emotions. I wanted to conclude on a quote from Nothing Personal that Tyler sent to me, and that also by coincidence or not, Josh from Gagosian sent by way of James Martin at the Avedon Foundation. We wanted to learn more about the Santa Monica pictures, but there wasn't actually any published writing about them, and James Martin sent a beautiful unpublished essay about what those images meant, and to talk about the idea of generations. And Deb, I have a question for you, and I hope it's not too personal, but as some of you may know from Deb's research, when you started your career, you had this question: could there be a story told about Afro-American photographers, and why is there no information about there, and how could you do it? And you set out with a list of all the photographers going back as far as you could, and to interview the ones who were still alive and to tell their stories. For anyone who has ever come in contact with Deborah Willis, immediately after meeting her, she will then introduce you to someone else, and then she'll introduce you to someone else and say, oh, you need to meet this person. And one of the things that is unremarked upon in the Academy, but is definitely remarked upon with regard to Deborah Willis, is that you created a field, but you also shared it, and you insisted that everyone go out there and make friends and make exhibitions and write articles. And I think Tyler and I are, of generations where we have been influenced by you, and we want to introduce people to people, and we want to meet the people you want us to meet. Did that sense of connectivity come from a space of loneliness? Like when you were coming up as a young scholar, were you thinking, oh, I have to share everything I've learned and also get other people involved? I mean, I want to know, I guess, what your emotional state was then, because if this question about generations that James Baldwin posed to us, was that something you were consciously thinking about in your teaching, or did that come naturally to you?
Yeah, I think it's part of like a tradition that I grew up in the beauty shop, so that was a shared experience. But also when I started working at the Schomburg Center, and prior to that, I met Ellis Hazlip, who had the show Soul. If anyone have opportunity to see the documentary Mr. Soul, he was an amazing person, a producer. But he said it was our responsibility and our duty to go to every Broadway show, every off-Broadway show, to see every Black star, up-and-coming star, to go to every exhibition. That if you have to go to book parties, you have to buy a book. And that basically is kind of spreading the knowledge in a sense. And Ellis felt that it was, and he made us, those of us who became part of his life, he made us really believe in our work, and he allowed us to share those moments of sharing it with others. Like, when I met Cheryl Finley, she had just graduated from college. She was sitting right where she's sitting now, the first row, Van der Zee talk, and I wanted to know who she was there, and it was 80s, and the fact is that there was someone who was interested in working the way that I felt. I love photography, and I felt that aspect of it, of storytelling. And storytelling was important because growing up in the beauty shop, growing up as a middle child, the middle child as I always experience in my life. And my mom would be very upset for me to say that. I always say the forgotten child. So in terms of that sense of loneliness, it was, I told my mother I wanted to be a big sister. always. And she said, well, and that was the big sister organization, Inc. And she said, don't bring any more home, because everybody I met was in my house, and they lived in my house after I left the house. And so what happened is that I just created this nest, and I felt it was really important. When I created Picturing Us, I thought about it, and I kept thinking about, I wanted to meet artists and writers, scientists, historians. I wanted to know, what do they think about photography? Because no one was writing about visual images. They were text on page, but not talking about that photograph of Van der Zee, or that photograph like Bell Hooks of her father. And so it was important for me to think about and invite people I didn't know to just talk about an image. And it was the first time that I actually created a collective body of work that I wanted to share. And I wanted everybody to love photography, to ask questions about photography, to be upset about photography, to be upset about what's missing in that. So that's something that was, significant for me.
Or to dream about what's possible. And I mean, in some ways, I think Tyler is a dream that you might have had earlier in your career. Yes. And then here he is now, your student, running the place in the best way.
Yeah, that's what I think Tyler and Hank, are my link, in terms of how the two of them, and both of you, you're both curating a show about a photographer, Irving Penn, Abaddon, and you both work in very similar ways. And the aspect of Tyler looking at clotheslines, that we're both also looking at clotheslines. And so the experience that is symbiotic in a sense, but we're experiencing something that, I'm glad you asked the question, because I never talk about this, but that experience is, I really believe in that link, that chain that just continues to grow and grow and grow.
Tyler, generations. It's nice because I do think almost every room I see you in, Deb, I see Cheryl in. So I think that nest really does hold true, and I think that's something special because I feel a part of that nest, and I feel I wouldn't be here without you. So I just want to say thank you. And yeah, I don't know, generations. I mean, that's it right there. It would not be without Deb's mind expanding, absolute space creating, supernova, wake making, historian, artist, curatorial expertise that I would be able to be here. So, I mean, it's really, you should really all see it whenever Deb, I think I've asked you for it maybe 10 or 15 times, and you always send it to me, then I lose it again, then I ask you for it every year, which is your Deborah Willis's PDF of the history of photography, which is, if you ever get to see that lecture, that's the one you want to see, which you came to Amsterdam and did with me and with Grace Wells Bonner, if you remember, and Grace, but also generations giving back as well, because I remember sitting in your class and saying to you, have you ever heard of Grace Wells Bonner? And you said, no, who is that? And then I said, you should really see it. It's this amazing British designer. I didn't know who she was, but now she's become someone we've lectured with and talked with, and yes, she's a visionary in her own way, and that's how the circle keeps expanding, because you bring other people in, and that's what you do best. And that's one small thing I'm trying to do as well, but it doesn't measure up. The middle child doesn't. I can't measure up.
Well, as much as I want to go on for another 3 hours, there are other talks, and so I would first of all like to thank the team at Perry Photo for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the team at Gagosian and Alexander Dorr, who is the brilliant studio manager for Tyler Mitchell, and also our absolutely wonderful guests, Tyler and Deb.